Sometime in the night on September 10, 1988, a young girl was abducted from her home in Midlothian, Illinois. The young girl was 7-year-old Jaclyn Marie Dowaliby. Jaclyn lived with her mom Cynthia, her stepfather David, her brother Davy, and her grandmother Anna. Her parents' lives were turned upside down after her death. The parents' account was that Jaclyn was abducted from her room sometime in the night at their home on 3636 West 148th Place in Midlothian, Illinois. The intruder may have come through the basement window and then walked to Jaclyn's room and then abducted her from the house. When Jaclyn's mom checked on her the next morning at around 9:45, Jaclyn was missing from her room. The family then searched for her frantically in the neighborhood. Jaclyn's mom searched the home again and then discovered a broken basement window. Jaclyn's stepfather David Dowaliby immediately called the police.
A break-in and my daughter's missing.
What's your last name?
Dowaliby.
Jaclyn's parents instantly thought Jaclyn's biological father Jimmy Guess had taken her as he had in the past, but he was in prison at the time of the incident. After 4 days of searching, Jaclyn's decomposed body was eventually found in an overgrown field behind an apartment complex in Blue Island, Illinois, 4 miles from where she was taken. Her body was wrapped up in her blanket and had a rope around her neck which had come from the family home's garage. There were 3 hairs found from the rope that was around Jaclyn's neck. 2 were consistent with Jaclyn's hair, and the other was not consistent with Jaclyn's hair or the hair of any of the Dowalibys. The coroner confirmed Jaclyn had probably been strangled but could not confirm if she had been sexually assaulted. Forensic scientist Jenny Hahn also claimed that there were 2 type O bloodstains on Jaclyn's pillow. They were different in color intensity, indicating that one was older than the other. There were no blood stains, sperm, or semen on the mattress pad. Hahn stated that she found 5 bloodstains on Jaclyn's bedspread. She could not determine if the stains were human or animal blood or the age of the stains. There were no traces of blood on the 2 sheets identified as coming from Jaclyn's bed or on the 2 pillowcases that were on Jaclyn's bed. The Dowalibys owned 2 vans, a truck and a light blue Chevrolet Malibu automobile. Hahn examined several hairs from the Malibu trunk mat. After visually comparing Jaclyn's head hair with the hair from the car mat, Hahn could not exclude them as coming from Jaclyn. Hahn testified that she never visually compared the hair from the mat or the hairnet found in the trunk with Cynthia's hair. When the first officer arrived on the scene, a suitcase filled with clothes was found on Jaclyn's bed. Jaclyn's mom Cynthia told him it was one of Jaclyn's playthings. Cynthia said she went to bed at 11:30 p.m. that night. David and Cynthia Dowaliby were considered the suspects in Jaclyn's murder. They both willingly gave DNA and took 2 lie detector tests each, where one of Cynthia's turned out to be inconclusive. David was not told Jaclyn's body had been found whilst they were interviewing him, and the Midlothian police used the Reed technique to interview and interrogate David in order to see if he would confess. Despite the interview, David Dowaliby was released due to lack of evidence. David claimed he was innocent. Days later, on September 18, 1988, family and friends went to Jaclyn's funeral at St. Mary's Cemetery in Evergreen Park, Illinois. The suspicion by the police was still looming over David and Cynthia. The day after Jaclyn's funeral, 20 police officers arrived at the Dowaliby home with a search warrant and collected 5 bags of material. 2 days before Thanksgiving, the police arrested David and Cynthia Dowaliby and charged them with first-degree murder. Police and prosecutors believed Jaclyn died possibly in an accident and that David disposed of the body. They also claimed they had 2 eyewitnesses who saw David in the area where Jaclyn's body was later found. The police's argument was there had been no outside intruder, so the Dowalibys had to be the killers. The police and the prosecutor claimed the house was undisturbed and claimed an intruder would have made a mess and their fingerprints would be on different items in the house. They said there was dust which was visible by the basement window where the alleged intruder had come in. It was later confirmed by Rob Warden, co-founder and director of the Northwestern Law Center on Wrongful Convictions, that the Midlothian police didn't cordon off the crime scene and didn't do enough of a thorough job in protecting it and checking the home for evidence. Rob Warden also noted one of the witnesses or only witness to seeing David Dowaliby in his vehicle and near where Jaclyn's body was found in Blue Island, Illinois from 75 yards away was Everett Mann, who aspired to be a police officer but suffered from bipolar disorder. He gave multiple different descriptions of the vehicle he saw. Mann claimed that at about 2 a.m. on September 10 he had seen someone with a large, straight nose pulling away from what he later learned was the location of the body. He said he could not tell whether the person was a man or a woman, but thought he or she was Caucasian. He described the car as dark-colored, dark blue, navy blue, black, or dark brown. Everett Mann was shown an array of photographs of possible suspects and asked which nose structure most resembled the one he had seen. He identified David Dowaliby. In subsequent interviews, Mann's description of the car changed. First, it had been merely dark-colored. Then it became mid-sized. Then, the latest 70s version of the Chevy Malibu. Finally, about a 1979 Chevy Malibu. Cynthia Dowaliby owned a 1980 Chevrolet Malibu. It was light blue, not dark, but the police surmised that it might somehow have appeared to be dark. The car was forensically examined, but there was no evidence that a body had been transported in it. The police investigation was based on the assumption that the basement window had been broken on the inside. It turned out they arrested and indicted the Dowalibys before the official forensic report came back on the window. It turned out from the forensic report that the window had been broken from the outside. The prosecution believed it was very unlikely an intruder could enter the house and traverse around a towel rack, a TV tray, makeup and nail polish whilst making noise breaking in the window in the night. David Dowaliby made a video to help prove their case. He had his neighbor crawl in through the window with the towel rack and other items below to prove someone could get in and traverse the area without standing on the towel rack and disturbing the surroundings. David Dowaliby's attorney also claimed an unknown fingerprint was found on the basement window which did not match with the couple's prints. On April 5, 1990, the Dowalibys' joint trial opened before Cook County Circuit Court Judge Richard E. Neville. At the conclusion of the prosecution case on May 1, Neville directed a verdict of not guilty for Cynthia, holding that the evidence against her was insufficient to sustain a guilty verdict. On May 3, 1990, David Dowaliby, mostly basing on the claim that the eyewitness Everett Mann saw him in the area where Jaclyn's body was found, was convicted and sentenced to consecutive terms of 40 years for murder and 5 years for concealing a homicide. Cynthia Dowaliby had been charged with physically and sexually abusing her son Davy, and lost custody of her son and another daughter, but the charges were later dismissed due to lack of evidence. Psychologists, a psychiatrist, and social workers all confirmed the son had no signs of physical or sexual abuse and that the pediatrician at Mount Sinai Hospital Medical Center had gone on a preconceived assumption her son had been abused. Cynthia then regained custody of her children. On July 15, 1990, a man kidnapped and sexually assaulted a 7-year-old girl from Midlothian, Illinois, 6 blocks from the home of the Dowalibys. The lawyers of the Dowalibys wanted more info about this case to see if there's a connection to Jaclyn's abduction and murder. The man charged for the July 15, 1990 abduction and sexual assault of the 7-year-old was 33-year-old Mark A. Melcher of Midlothian, Illinois. The police said he was serving 3 years in prison and was behind bars when the abduction and murder of Jaclyn Dowaliby took place. Mark Melcher committed a similar crime to Jaclyn's and came in through the parents' bedroom window and took the girl out the house in a blanket. The police found his fingerprints on the window. On October 30, 1991, the Illinois Appellate Court unanimously reversed David's conviction, without the possibility of a retrial, holding that Judge Neville had erred in not directing a verdict in David's case, as he had done in Cynthia's. Cook County State's Attorney Jack O'Malley announced that he would appeal to the Illinois Supreme Court and, meanwhile, would oppose David's release on bond. On November 11, over O'Malley's objection, the Supreme Court set bond and, after depositing it, David was released 2 days later on November 13, 1991. He had spent 583 days behind bars, counting 24 days in jail after his 1988 arrest. On February 5, 1992, the Supreme Court rejected O'Malley's appeal, officially ending the case.
Today's not a day to be bitter or to look back. I'm just looking forward to seeing my family. So maybe in a few weeks or so, once it's sunk in, I might look back and decide what to do next.
9 months later, NBC's Unsolved Mysteries broadcast a segment on the case, resulting in a tip that an early suspect in the case, Timothy Guess, the paranoid schizophrenic brother of Jaclyn's natural father, had provided a false alibi for the night Jaclyn disappeared. Guess had told police and the FBI that he had spent the entire night at an all-night restaurant in South suburban Harvey. 2 waitresses had corroborated the alibi at the time, but they told Protess and Hogan that in fact Guess had been there only briefly around 9:30 p.m. They said they had lied because they believed that the Dowalibys were guilty and did not want to get involved. Several customers who had been at the restaurant, who had never been questioned by police, also said Guess had not been there. On December 17, 1992, the uncle of Jaclyn Dowaliby, Timothy Guess, confessed to her abduction and murder, which was taped and recorded by investigative journalist David Protess. Timothy Guess described how the Dowaliby home appeared inside. Timothy Guess said, "He had been guided by a spirit who gives me psychic powers that enabled him to precisely describe the layout and interior of the Dowaliby home, where he had never been." It could have also been possible he had been shown photographs by Jaclyn's biological father Jimmy, which would have perhaps shown parts of the home in the photos. He would have also not known that the grandmother would have gone out that night. Timothy Randall Guess passed away in the year 2002. Another sex offender named Perry Hernandez was also considered a person of interest in her case but was later ruled out by police.
Dowaliby taken from her bed as she slept in 1988. Her killer is officially still gone in the night. But as investigative reporter Chuck Gowdy found, some experts believe the case was solved years ago.
Jaclyn Dowaliby would have turned 35 years old next week had she not been taken from her bed and murdered, a case that became nationally prominent in the made-for-TV movie Gone in the Night. Her mother and stepfather, Cynthia and David Dowaliby, were arrested and taken to trial, then eventually acquitted, and no one else has ever been charged. These Dowaliby case files are rarely touched here at Midlothian Police Headquarters, though the murder of 7-year-old Jaclyn Dowaliby is officially unsolved. Police say there hasn't been a new lead in years, but oddly, even with an open murder on the books, Chief Harold Kaufman declined to be interviewed for this report.
I don't know why the police are not pursuing this case.
It suggests to me that they think they had it right and that there's really nobody and nothing out there that's going to change that conclusion.
September 1988, someone apparently breaks through this basement window and takes Jaclyn Dowaliby as she sleeps, carries her past the bedroom where her mother and adoptive father are asleep, and out the front door. A week later, her body found in a Blue Island field, a rope from the family's garage around her neck.
Strangulation, death by strangulation.
We're not ruling out that a relative or friend could be involved.
When Jaclyn Dowaliby disappeared, some eyes looked here to South Florida, the home of her biological father, Jimmy Guess. There was just one problem with that theory. Mr. Guess, at the time, was locked up in prison.
When Jaclyn gone, I mean, a big part of me died, and I just been living just like a zombie ever since then. I mean, really, it really tore me up, killed me. You know, a lot of things didn't matter to me. Still don't.
In 1988, with Jimmy Guess in prison, police attention turned to Jaclyn's mother, Cynthia, and stepfather, David.
They will take the Fifth Amendment, that they are not going to cooperate or communicate with us any further in this investigation.
2 months later, both were charged with murder and tried together. The jury actually taken to the crime scene. But before jurors could decide the case, a Cook County judge acquitted Mrs. Dowaliby for insufficient evidence. Mr. Dowaliby was convicted and sentenced to 45 years. But in 1991, he too was released when the Illinois Appellate Court overturned his conviction, also because of insufficient evidence. Let's say that you were able to talk to them. What's the question you would ask?
I would ask them why. I mean, number one, why didn't you protect her? That's a parent's, you know, that's, how can you not protect a kid?
It's any parent's worst nightmare.
We did speak with the attorneys who defended them more than 25 years ago.
Because it was such an emotionally charged case and all that publicity, they needed a defendant.
I see this as two innocent people who were put under extraordinary pressures and walked away as free people.
The defense lawyers offered 2 alternate suspects, Jimmy Guess's mentally ill brother Tim, who claimed to have an alibi, and child sex offender Perry Hernandez, whose M.O. resembled what happened to Jaclyn Dowaliby. Police ruled out Hernandez as a Dowaliby suspect, but he is still in prison for an unrelated case. Even if new evidence surfaced further implicating Cynthia and David Dowaliby, they couldn't be tried under the double jeopardy clause of the Constitution. Sadly, is this one of those rare cases where justice will never be done?
You either had the right people in the first place and they ultimately got off, or you had the wrong people, but there are no other leads. And either way, whoever committed that murder is free.
The I-Team has learned that David and Cynthia Dowaliby now live 40 miles away from where the murder happened, now use a different last name. On numerous occasions the past month, we asked both of them to discuss the unsolved murder of their daughter with an eye toward generating possible new leads from the public. They didn't respond.
The murder case of Jaclyn Marie Dowaliby had no real conclusion, and justice has ultimately never been served. The police thought the parents were responsible even though they were officially exonerated in the court of law. It's still possible, if indeed an abductor did this crime, that the person who is responsible for her murder is still alive.